Heidi, thank you for having us here at the Judson House. We came here, to investigate. Irene did her walkthrough in the space. Tell us a little bit about the history of the house.
Well, the history of the house or the history of the land?
Well, we can start with the land.
Okay.
And then go with the house.
Let's start with the very beginning.
Okay.
We know that there were Indians here. All right. 1753, the French come here and they built their fort, the French fort. George Washington was sent here to tell them that they needed to leave, that this is British territory. So George Washington comes up here, he meets with the French, and the French are like, we're not leaving right now. George Washington goes back to where he came from, and a couple years later the French did decide to leave, and when they left they burnt the fort down. Then the British came in and they built their fort. Kept the same name, called the Fort LaBeouf.
So there were 2 forts here.
3 total.
3 total forts.
3 total, right. So the French had called it Fort de la Rivière au Boeuf, which is the fort by the river of beef, because there were bison everywhere standing in the river. So they burned their fort down in 1759. So they're here from 1753 to 1759. Then the British fort, they built that in 1760. It is here for 3 years. Pontiac's Rebellion, the Indian Uprising, the Indians come here and they burn that fort down in 1763. Then the Americans come here in 1794 and they build their fort, which was a blockhouse with a stockade around it. The town of Waterford was then laid out. Andrew Ellicott was just finishing up surveying Washington, D.C., and he was then sent up here to establish Waterford. It was the next most important place in the United States that had to be established because of the waterways. You could follow the waterway all the way down to the Gulf. So at that time in the 1700s, the only place that they could get salt was in upstate New York. So they were mining it up there, taking it to Erie by boat, and then by oxen down to here. And there were warehouses here on the creek where they would store the salt until the river was high enough so they could ship it on down south. So we needed the salt trade going through here. When the salt trade, died out, the town stayed small. It was actually bigger than Erie at one point. So after Andrew Ellicott comes here and lays out Waterford, he then goes up to Erie. And a lot of people don't realize downtown Erie and downtown Waterford right down close. It's the same town.
Wow.
You could superimpose the pictures, and it's the same town. So then, when the people came here, they were digging up the ground, to build their homes and stuff, and they were digging up human remains everywhere. These forts had cemeteries there. And they didn't know where these cemeteries were. They knew that there were a lot of soldiers buried here, but they didn't know where. So they were digging up human remains everywhere. One of the first people that had settled here in the late 1700s was Judge John Vincent, and his exact words were, "Fragments of human skeletons pervade the soil." I thought the word pervade was interesting because it means diffuse throughout.
Right.
So it's everywhere. It's human remains everywhere.
I know that on our way in here, Irene was picking up that wherever we were going to was near a cemetery or near a church or cemetery where people were buried. So.
Right, and the town was built on top of cemeteries.
Right.
So, I had heard that Waterford was, so haunted. So I'm like, well, what's making it so haunted? So I'm digging into the history of this. So then I looked at the people. Who were the first people that settled here? Who are these people? Well, there was the Fort Freeland Massacre that happened 16 years before this town was established. It was 1799. It was bad. These people were massacred. Some were taken up to Canada, and she said that there was a Canadian connection. And I'm like, oh, these people were taken prisoners and taken up to Canada. Like, she would have known that,
Right.
So they take a lot of these people up to Canada.
Can I stop you for 1 second? Do you know if they were taken to a fort in Canada?
That I don't know where they were taken to.
She was hitting on, we drove past exit 17 here, and she goes, there's something here that we're going to be investigating. But that was last weekend. She didn't know that we were coming here.
Oh, interesting. Well, after, the whole war and the Indian uprisings and all that, and Waterford is now established, those people from that Fort Freeland Massacre are the first people that came here and settled. When the Indians massacred the fort, the people that were left there, they just all kind of like screwed and went back to homes where they used to be, like Connecticut, New Jersey, and they just kind of dispersed everywhere. But when this opened up and it was a town, they all got together and came here, those same families. I think it's a lot of them. I think that they have like a real love for this town, you know, because after everything they went through, and if you read the history on this, it was bad, you know, it was the stuff that they saw, you know, and what they endured there. And they come here and now it's this brand new shiny town with, they got hope that it's going to be okay. That front door is open.
Yeah, the front door is open and I heard a bell go.
Yeah.
Is that the front door?
There's a bell over the top of the...
Interesting.
Yeah. So then I was always, still looking into, the history of everything. And someone had told me that there was an old cemetery on the west end of town, fell to ruin, and that they were going to move it and put it into the new cemetery, but all they did was they just moved the headstones, but they didn't move the bodies. And I'm like, oh, come on.
You hear that all the time.
And I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. And somebody else told me, no, that's not what happened. What they did was they dug up the cemeteries and they paved the dirt streets with, bones and dirt and everything from the cemetery. You guys are nuts.
Right.
What is with these people in this town?
So there's literally bones in the street.
Yes.
Okay.
I started digging through old newspapers, and sure enough, I found the newspaper articles that talk about that cemetery and how they dug it up and paved the streets with the remains. What I think happened, this is 1883. This is August. It's probably hot, and it's just guys with shovels. They probably did the best they could trying to dig it up and move it, because they really didn't know where exactly they were buried. A lot of the headstones were gone. So, it's just a crapshoot, like trying to dig around, trying to find, So, yeah, it was probably a terrible spectacle, it just looked terrible. But I think they did the best they could, and then what was left over, they used it to fill in the potholes and grade the streets now. Some of the older people will say that you would find pieces of broken bone and broken jewelry and stuff in the streets.
Wow.
I think they did the best they could. It wasn't
right.
Doing anything really bad. Well, anyways, after the town's established, one of the other first people that came here was Amos Judson. Amos Judson is the man who built this house. So that part of the house, the older part, was built in 1810. He put this part on in 1820. And, it sits right on the land where the fort was. When he passed away, his niece Eunice got the house. In fact, she lived with him. And she brought in her sister Marietta, who married Henry Vincent, and they lived in here with their children. After her parents died, she still lived here by herself. She was a music teacher. And I thought it was so interesting how she picked up on the music in the house.
Yes, on the way here, Irene did hear humming, and it was a specific song, and I'd never heard the song before, but she's not a hummer, but on the way in, on the street, she started humming, and she's like, I don't know why, but I need to hum. And then she started humming a song, so.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then when she came in, started walking through the house, definitely in that area over there, the dining room area. She was saying, the Hummer is over that way, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, then after Grace died, the house was then sold to the Patchins and the Johnstons. It became the Washington Inn for a while. It was a restaurant, and they also rented rooms and stuff. The state of Pennsylvania bought it in 1949, turned it into a museum. They had caretakers living in here until probably the 1990s or so, and then the Fort LaBeouf Historical Society took over as the caretaker, but we have since purchased this house. So we own this house, the museum next door, the George Washington statue, the gardens behind it, the Eagle Hotel, and the second storefront here on High Street. That's our offices, and our gift shop is in there.
And this whole land was owned by Amos Judson, or?
Well, he bought and sold a lot of land in this area. I went through the deeds. He owned a lot. But he owned this house. He did own the Eagle Hotel for a while, and he did own that corner building for a while that you saw over here. So, but there's a lot of places, he was always wheeling and dealing. He was never married, didn't have any children, very wealthy man. You know, he owned a store. He was a woodworker. I mean, he did a lot of things. And when I go through the property deeds, he owned a lot of property throughout Waterford and LaBeouf Township. You know, he's always buying and selling stuff. There was something else when I was searching through a lot of history here. I came across something that I thought was interesting, because you know there's connections with people. So sometimes I think families, like their energy is strong or something. Years ago, I had ran into this man called Christopher de Cesare. Have you ever heard of him? Christopher de Cesare. All right, he wrote this book, Please Talk With Me. It was about the C2D1 haunting. So Tim's like, they kept thinking it was like a college student or something because it's at a college campus. And Tim's like, no, I think you brought this here. And of course, Christopher's like, I didn't bring anything here. What are you talking about?
Right.
Christopher was a runner, and he ran all the time. Well, he kept running past this park. And Tim's like, I think you picked up something from that park. Well, that park, there is, it's the Boyd Parker Torture Tree Burial Mound. This is back in the 1700s. The Indians had tortured Boyd and Parker. It was bad what they did to them up there. They tied them to a tree, they tortured them, it was really bad. Well, when I was doing the genealogy and stuff on the people that first settled here, this is Thomas Boyd. This is one of the relatives of the Boyd family that first settled here. In fact, in that dining room is that sideboard was made by one of the Boyds.
Okay.
So one of the first families that settled here, the Boyds from Northumberland County, is part of that same family of Thomas Boyd that was tortured by the Indians in upstate New York.
Well, when speaking about what possibly Irene picked up in the basement, the shadow down there,
Right.
do you think that may be a part of that tortured piece of soul?
I don't know if it's from that or the soldiers that were buried here, because so many soldiers died here. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, she definitely said there was an anger there, and have other people picked up on that energy down there?
Yeah.
But there's also energy of a happy person down there.
Yeah, that's the first time I ever heard that from anyone saying that a happy person down there.
Do you know if there's ties to the Underground Railroad in this town or in this building itself?
Everyone in Waterford, they were all abolitionists, most of them. In fact, Amos Judson's nephew, William Judson, had a house right down the street. And some people think that may have been part of the Underground Railroad, but there's no proof to it. You know, just because he was an abolitionist, they didn't believe in slavery here. So I don't know if that's a connection or not. I do know of one black family that lived here in Waterford, and the one girl was a servant in this house.
Okay.
And she had brothers, and they ended up moving to Erie. And that's how they moved.
All right. Well, he might have. I mean, maybe he did work around here as well.
Yeah.
On the land
Very
or.
good.
So what else do you know from our walkthrough that really caught your attention that Irene might have said?
But you talking about the horse.
The horse?
The horse.
Yeah,
The horse was great.
She has an allergy to horses, and when we were just about to get started with our walkthrough, her allergies really kicked up, and she goes, "This is horse. She's like, maybe farm animal, but no, this is horse." So
I've been struggling a lot with my allergies. So it could just be my allergies, or it could be something spirit related. Sometimes when I'm around horses, like I'll get that really quick spot where suddenly my allergies will kick up. And it's with animals too, but distinctly I feel like the feeling I get when I'm around horses. So I don't know if there were horses around this property or on this property at some point, but I feel like there were horses around. Because like my allergies are really, I was fine this entire time until I started the reading. So I feel like, or it could just be farm animals, but I don't know, I see horses.
what do we know about the horse of Waterford?
There was a man, Colonel Colt. He was in the Civil War, and when he was in the war, he stole a horse from the South and brought it up here. And he named it Old Frank. And old Frank just roamed the streets of Waterford. He was kind of like the pet, the town pet. He would visit people and make pet them and feed them and whatever. But one day, during the 4th of July parade, they're parading down the road, la da 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 da, the band's playing, the cannons kick off, and the horse dies of a heart attack in the middle of the street. We have old Frank here. Old Frank. And they had a big funeral for him. They buried him in our park, upright with his saddle on him, his sword, the American flag draped around him. They had a band playing. They had a minister doing a eulogy. Oh yeah, it was a big thing for old Frank.
And I know she heard a parade going by.
She kept talking about a parade too.
So maybe it was the horse that came along just to say hello.
Right, could be.
Old Frank.
Yep, old Frank. Town pet.
There's a room upstairs that Irene was getting a very big war feeling too, like a secret meeting.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
And I see 3 men I'm looking at. I'm sitting here, and there's, like, it feels like there's a couple more men over here. So when I turn around, but it's hard to tell. And it's just like there's something secret about what they're doing. So
the only thing I can think of is maybe when the fort was here, something was going on that we don't know about. Or during the Civil War, you know, Henry Vincent lived in this house. And his nephew, Strong Vincent, gets killed at Gettysburg. They could have been in here talking about that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. She kept seeing that there was energy in the land coming through people. Right. And I mean, maybe she's picking up the fact that there were 3 forts here and soldiers coming in and out. And
the Eagle Hotel was a stagecoach stop, so a lot of people would have been through here too. And then she mentioned presidents.
She asked about Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
He hadn't stayed here, but she kept getting flashes of Abraham Lincoln.
We have a room upstairs dedicated to Abraham Lincoln because it's kind of our nod to him for making Strong Vincent a brigadier general as he lay dying in Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Zachary Taylor.
Zachary
Taylor.
Okay.
Zachary Taylor stayed at the Eagle Hotel.
Okay.
So we did have a president.
So Irene, as she's coming in, she was like, that building, and that building. They all have a lot of things going on, paranormal activity. What kind of activities do you get, or have you had other groups get in this space?
Okay, in the Judson house, a lot of EVPs, a lot of things moving, a lot of interaction. A lot of times you ask a question, you get an answer. It's kind of crazy here. The Eagle Hotel seems to be quieter, but when something happens, it's big. You know, it's something you're not going to forget. You know, and over there at the Eagle Hotel, you can be in one room and telling the spirits to go into another room and do something, and they'll do that.
Okay.
All right, like I was in a session one time with somebody, well, they're doing an EVP session, and they were playing the recorder back, and you could hear a bell ringing. And we're like, oh, what is this bell at? It sounded like it was right next to the recorder. We're like, what the heck's going on, you know? And then there was the other group that was in the hotel. They come into our room, and they're like, yeah, you know, I was trying to tell the spirits that I used to be a cook too, and that they needed to ring my bell. We were getting the bell ringing in our room. How crazy, you know, that kind of stuff happens.
All right, well, thank you for having us here. We are excited to investigate tonight and see what kind of validation we can get.
There could be a lot here. You got French soldiers, British soldiers, American soldiers. You know, the people that lived here, they all have like little quirky things about them. You know, they all did like little strange things. I love the music connection.
Me too. Hopefully we can get some humming or singing, maybe EVP. That would be cool.
Yeah, over at the Eagle Hotel, I did an investigation over there one time, and one of them went to the second floor and got a recording of music that sounded like piano music, like an old kind of saloon type piano playing. 2 years later, a group from Pittsburgh was up here, and they got the same EVP up in the ballroom.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
A lot with music here.
Okay, we can maybe play some music and try to get some trigger going.
Yeah. For sure.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're excited.
You're welcome. Yeah. It's a good place. It's pretty nice. A lot of history here. A lot of history here.
And that's what's important too. Like knowing the history and telling the history, keeping those energies alive and